An elderly American man with slightly trembling hands opens an envelope sent from the White House. The letter is printed, of course, but is personally signed by the 43rd President of the United States of America, George Bush. In it, the country's leader, along with the First Lady, congratulate Mr. Robert on his 103rd birthday. The presidential family expressed gratitude for the role that Mr. Robert had played in American history and culture. According to them, he continues to serve as a role model for the new generation. The elderly man reads the letter aloud, then sheds a tear. Then he walks along a wall covered with letters, all of them addressed to Robert. Most of them with requests from different people to forgive them for their immature outlook and silly pranks. The man carefully places the letter from Bush near the velvet-covered stand. Mr. Robert's legs are comfortably set on it as he sits nearby it on a wooden chair. Yes, the 103-year-old birthday boy, Robert, turned out to be a rag doll dressed as a sailor. He is a little over 3 feet, a meter tall, and his body is stuffed with sawdust. Blonde hair sticks out from under the headdress. Contrary to popular rumors, it is not human, but made of synthetic wool fiber. Robert's face looks creepy, as if he was a gangster who'd been slashed with a knife, or perhaps the victim of poor-quality plastic surgery. Above his black beady eyes is a line from temple to temple, upon which eyebrows are faintly visible. There's a seam around the mouth, and the same stretches from the lips down the chin. The nose is nothing but a couple of holes. Robert's face once had paint on it, but now there are barely any visible traces of it, almost akin to scars. Maybe this is due to the fact that more than a century has passed since its creation, or maybe the paint from the face was licked off by the doll's eternal companion, a creepy-looking dog. Yes, Mr. Robert is one of the most famous haunted dolls in the world. Now the possessed sailor performs small tricks in the museum. But before this, he used to do terrible, inexplicable things. It all started at 534 Eaton Street in Key West, Florida. In 1904, 10-year-old Robert Eugene Otto lived there and received the doll as a gift. The boy instantly became attached to it and gave his new friend his same name, Robert. Well, why not? Anyways, everyone called him the abbreviated version of his middle name, Gene. Waking up one night, Eugene saw his favorite doll sitting at the head of the bed. It's not clear how Robert got there, but now it was staring at the boy. A moment later, Gene's mother jolted awake in her bed. She heard the cries of her son, who called for help, and the noise of falling furniture. The child's parents rushed over to his room, but couldn't open the door. It was blocked by something from the inside, as if some force resisted their efforts and held the door. The couple continued their futile attempts to get into Gene's room. All this time they heard the sounds of mayhem, breaking glass, and a deafening roar akin to 1,000 tigers. They saw a flicker from under the door, and the door itself seemed to heave over and crack. Then there was an abrupt silence. Now the door opened easily for Gene's parents. The frightened boy was curled up in the corner of the room, crying. The room itself was completely destroyed, and only the toy sailor sat peacefully on the edge of the child's bed. The only words the 10-year-old child could manage were, "Robert did it." Since then, this phrase began to be repeated in the house constantly. Each time they were uttered following strange events that were accompanied by some varying degrees of material damage and destruction to the Otto family. This is part of the famous legend of Robert, which, albeit, has several versions. The history of the possessed toy begins with the question of where it came from. There are various assumptions about who created it and how it came to have paranormal abilities. 2 of them are related to voodoo magic. Otto's family had a Haitian maid. She loved the son of the owners very much, so she decided to create a charm for him. The doll she sewed was supposed to protect little Gene. But when she performed the magic ceremony, something went wrong. Or Robert, created with the help of voodoo, perceived the concept of protect in his own way. Another version says that the head of the Otto family treated the maid badly, or maybe even abused her. The Haitian decided to take revenge. She made a doll and cursed it with black magic and voodoo. So Rag Robert began to punish everyone who was next to him. According to the other version, the toy sailor washed up on the shore of Key West along with the wreckage of the wrecked ship. Somehow, Gene's parents picked up the item and the boy instantly liked it. Except that the ship, along with all its crew, was destroyed by the devil, and the souls of the unfortunate sailors moved into the doll. Another mystical story links Robert's possession not with him, but with his costume. The doll itself was made in Germany and delivered to the USA, but it was wearing too simple and low-quality clothes. The respected Otto family could not afford to dishonor their own son like that. Eugene's mother noticed a children's sailor suit in the window of one of the local boutiques and literally fell in love with it. Plus, the outfit was just the right size for the doll. Well, either that, or it had to be hemmed a little. But that's neither here nor there. What was really important was that the suit was made from restored fabric. Previously, it was pajamas for a boy about the same age as Jean. The owner of the pajamas died of yellow fever, and the spirit of a child tormented by the illness moved into the fabric and remained in it forever. The last version of the story behind the Robert doll is just proof that the toy was made in Germany. It's not all that uninteresting, given there is no mysticism in it. It is believed that Jean's grandfather bought the doll when he traveled to Germany. He gave the boy the toy for his birthday. Moreover, Robert was not the only one of his kind. It looks like it was made by the German company Steiff. The latter is still operating successfully, selling children's clothing and toys all over the world. Representatives from the company have suggested that Robert was not originally created for retail sale. He was probably part of a set of dolls for a showcase of clowns or jesters. And as for the sailor's costume, it is really sewn much better than the doll itself. It seems that the Otto family picked up his clothes already. What's more, this costume could have been worn by Eugene himself when he was little. Wherever the Robert doll came from, it was possessed by some entity. After it ransacked Eugene's room, the toy was thrown away. But by the next morning, the little sailor was again in their house. This happened dozens of times until the Otto family finally gave up. Despite the strange nature of it all, Gene became even more attached to the toy. He claimed that it could talk and move. The boy's parents confirmed that they heard not only their son talking to the doll, but also a completely unfamiliar voice answering him. Moreover, they themselves saw Robert talking. And not only that, the toy watched people, giggled, and even wandered around the house, and climbed the stairs. No other serious pogroms were reported in the house, but throughout his life, Gene Otto accused the doll of various domestic troubles. Eugene's bond with the toy sailor was intimate. A little too intimate. After the death of his parents, he moved into their house with his wife, Anne. The woman tensed slightly when her husband announced that Robert would live in the room on the top floor. The woman was frightened by the 3-foot-long humanoid toy and her husband's relationship with it, so she asked Gene to take the doll to the attic. As you can imagine, Robert didn't like that too much. The hosts and guests of the house began to hear the distinct sounds of footsteps coming from the attic, and the local children complained that a scary doll was watching them from the top floor window. Eugene protested that it couldn't be because Robert was locked up in the attic. But when he went to check the top floor, the doll had ended up in the room in front of the window. After that incident, no matter how many times the owners locked the sailor in the attic, he always ended up in the armchair in the room on the top floor. Until his death in 1974, Gene Otto rushed around with his doll and talked about it as if it were alive. The story could have ended there, if not for the new residents of the house on Eaton Street. The family had a 10-year-old daughter who was delighted with the big old doll found in the attic. But her joy did not last long. Soon the girl complained to her parents about Robert. She jumped out of bed screaming because he walked around the room at night. Somehow the doll even tried to hurt the girl, after which the parents gave the toy to the museum. There, Robert was given a comfortable place, protected from the sun's rays by glass with a UV filter. The doll has since become a local landmark, but many visitors take Robert lightly, a mistake for which they pay. Hundreds of tourists have reported that their cameras and phones stopped working next to the Robert doll. And pictures with the toy most often don't come out quite right. Those daredevils who have allowed themselves to joke about Robert later regret it. Police have reported that after visiting this exhibit in the museum, they'd gotten into accidents and other unpleasant situations, were injured, and even divorced. Having survived these serious occurrences, tourists send letters to Robert asking him to forgive them. Anywhere from 1 to 3 such messages come in on the daily. Particularly courageous museum visitors are invited to volunteer to stay with Robert after dark. Museum staff say that the expression on the doll's face has changed during its stay there. And others say they heard whimpering and even saw how Robert once put his hand to the glass. The Robert doll is frightening and inspiring. In 2008, for the first time in the 104 years of his life, he left Key West. The doll was presented at the TapsCon exhibition organized by the Atlantic Paranormal Society. Robert appeared in the Haunted Museum program by Zach Baggins and in the TV series Lure. 5 films were made about him, the last of which was released in 2019. Of course, there is no conclusive evidence that the Robert doll is paranormal, and scientists generally explain the fear of him with such a concept as uncanny valley. It was formulated in 1970 by the Japanese robotics professor Masahiro Mori. The scientist argued that the external similarity of work with a person causes an inexplicable feeling of disgust or horror in people. Later studies proved that the fear of dolls is in people's blood. More precisely, in front of all humanoid entities, be it 3D or virtual animation, robots, or toys. Something that looks almost like a person, but is not, will inevitably cause an anxiety attack or some form of disgust. Have you ever noticed this feeling of primal fear in front of a doll or a mannequin? Perhaps you have your own reasons. Share your stories in the comments below.